Hello, everyone. My name is Clay Gordon, and I want to welcome everybody to this edition of The Chocolate Life Live. No matter where you might be tuning in from, no matter what kind of chocolate fan you are, we're here to help answer your questions, perhaps provoke some interesting thoughts. And in that respect, my guest today is Diego Lara. Diego, how are you today?
Hello, Clay. I'm
Good.
doing well. Thank you very
Good.
much for the
I
invitation.
understand you are. I understand you're calling in from Guatemala City. Um,
Guatemala City, yes.
it's a place that I have always wanted to visit. I haven't had a chance to visit Guatemala yet. And if anybody is watching today, you might hear some fabulous songbirds in the
Yeah.
background. It's really lovely. It's the rainy season in Guatemala right now. And the birds are out and about, and it's just really quite lovely. So what I want to do is I want to remind everybody, as I always do, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, you have the ability to go into the comments and ask a question. So if there's anything that we talk about today, please do bring it up in the comments and questions. And even if it's just raising your hand and saying, here's where you're connecting from around the world, we'd love to know where you're watching from today. So Diego, when most people think of GrainPro, they think about bags that are used to store soft commodities. Now, that soft commodity might be cocoa, it could be coffee, it could be rice or some other grain, right? But the company obviously has been working on these bags for quite some time. You've been in the community, and it sort of makes sense, I think, to say, well, if we're going to store these things in bags, we need to make sure that they are dried properly, right? Moisture is going to be an issue. So, can you talk a little bit about the history of your involvement or the company's involvement in communities, not just cocoa, but other soft commodities, and why drying became an important technology for you guys to focus on?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Clay. It's a pleasure to be here. As you said, our most popular product are the GrainPro bags. I think that most of the producers and processors, they know very well how it works. But we have been working on developing different solutions for all the agriculture industry with more than 25 years. And actually, we have been focusing on three main areas: on drying, storage, and transportation. Since there are the three main elements on the post-harvest stage. And we understand that each area is connected, right? Most of the producers, they have been making big efforts on the planting process, in taking care about the trees, in taking care about what are the best agronomic practices at the moment to produce high quality beans. But at the end, there is a lot of misinformation on how you can adapt to the next stage, which is the drying, the storage, and the transportation. That's why GrainPro has been developing these solutions, and we have extensive experience all over the world, mostly focusing on the developing countries or on the tropics, where we understand that there are different practices, but also there are a lot of challenges at the moment to produce high quality grains, right? We have different experience.
So if I can jump in quickly, because I think that you mentioned an important phrase there, which is post-harvest processing. So when we think about cocoa, I think most people, when they think about post-harvest processing, the focus is on fermentation, right? And there's an awareness that sort of drying is this thing that happens once you get done fermenting, right? And that obviously, if we can, we want to dry under the sun. It's a free resource, and there are advantages in terms of slow drying in the sun. But there's not a whole lot of understanding about how the time and temperature that are associated with drying will have an effect on, how quickly fermentation ends, carryover practices and things like that. But, if I think about fermentation or drying in general, it's fairly inexpensive just to throw up some sort of pad, whether it's a concrete pad or a wooden pad or some other structure and put some beans on it and dry them. So what was the problem that you were trying to solve? I mean, that the conventional technologies that you saw for drying were not addressing. So,
Yes.
what was, again, the specific demands that people were having that said, ooh,
Yes.
we can take what it is we know about fabrication, we can take what it is that we know about the rest of the process downstream, but how do we apply that understanding to drying specifically?
Well, everyone knows that the sun drying process is better in terms of the quality, in terms of the elements that can provide to the cocoa beans. We have seen different methods on the conventional methods, as you said, on concrete patios or tarpaulins or the same ground that the people are putting the cocoa beans. What you are doing there is that you are not having an optimal drying process. One, because there is a re-wetting process from the same ground, but also there is a contaminant component for those beans. And you can have the risk of that fermentation can be on the wrong way. That's why we are providing the elements of the isolation from the ground with mainly two different products that they are working. It could work for small farmers, but also for large farmers that they have the needs to have a proper drying process. When you are doing a sun drying process, you are lowering the acid flavor or the sour flavor of the cocoa beans. That is related strongly with some technical words, like it could be the acetic acid that evaporates when you are sun drying. It could be different if you are using other methods as mechanical drying process or other closed rooms where you are doing that direction, right? So at the end, what we are trying to achieve here is to give the proper environment to the cocoa beans or whatever commodity that you are drying, so they can take all the benefits from the sun, but at the same time avoid the external contaminants that you are having on the tropics, right? On the tropics, you have temperatures above 30 Celsius. You have relative humidity, which is an important element that we need to take in consideration, which basically is the amount of moisture on the air, that it could reach 65% or above. And when you are dealing with that climate conditions, you are on risk of mold development, but also you have on risk of other factors that can affect the quality and the integrity of the cocoa beans. The astringency and the bitterness, there are some elements that we need to take in consideration on this stage.
So when I think about most technologies for sun drying, right? I tend to put them into two categories. One is a passive category, and one is an active category. So right now, this is a photograph that I took in 2010 in Grenada, showing a very, very traditional for Grenada kind of setup. You have a bunch of platforms which can roll under roofs to protect them in case it decides to rain, and somebody is raking the cocoa with their feet. So this is a very, very traditional kind of approach that's taken around the world. This is a variation of that same approach. This is in Nicaragua. It's at Ingaman. And what you're seeing here is we have a concrete platform, but on top of the concrete platform are sheets of stainless steel. So the stainless steel absorbs heat very, very easily. It transfers the heat from the parts of it that are, exposed to the sun underneath the surface where the beans are. And then there is this movable cover in case it decides to rain. It's still passive, but what we've done is we've added this additional stainless steel component to it. And somebody comes along with a rake and moves things here. This is a drawing for a solar dryer. It's a kind of technology. It uses plastic sheeting and strips. And the whole idea here is to, number one, raise the heat inside the tunnel, but two, provide airflow So to take the moisture, which is evaporated out of the beans, and then to be able to move it out of the tunnel on an effective basis, or more effectively than some other means might be. This is an example of an active drying. So here is a propane burner. This was in Ecuador. I took this in 2005 when I was there. This propane burner is throwing a lot of heat into these bins, which have perforations in the bottom. The heat comes up from the bottom. And you can see, if you're not very careful, that you might actually roast or burn the beans in the process of drying them. That's what's happening on the left here. We have the burns, which are completely. So you would do this in a place where there's an enormous amount of humidity. It might be a lot of rain. And so you don't get an effective drying process. And so bang, right? It takes a while. I mean, this is a drying pad, drying room. There's just this an enormous outdoor structure which created. This is in Ucayali River in Peru. And we have tables, and the tables are covered with a plastic covered wire mesh, and the beans are laid out on top of them. Again, you might be able to see that the sides of this can be rolled up so we can control airflow within it, but there's room for an enormous amount of beans that can be dried at any one time. And I think that this is like 5 meters tall. I mean, it's an enormously tall space. You walk in and the smell of the acid is just like, it just blows you away, especially if there are new beans that have just been put in. This is a similar kind of thing, much, much smaller. This is at Agrofloresta in Tabasco in Mexico, a much more conventional kind of drying tunnel. Notice there's some differences. There's no opening at the top, so the moisture can't come out the top, but the sides will roll up to the little black line that's here. So you can control some aspects of airflow into here. And here, this was in Venezuela. I was there in 2006. And here we see on the right-hand side, here's a farmer who's actually just putting the beans on the asphalt on the side of the road and sun drying them, right? This is quite quick because the asphalt gets quite hot. It runs the risk of the beans actually absorbing, if it gets warm enough, the smell of the asphalt. And if there are diesel trucks driving back and forth, you run the risk of diesel exhaust fumes. And we saw drying on the side of the road. I saw it in Ecuador when I was there, and I've seen it other places. On the left is another community, which is just down the road from where this farmer is working. But what they've done is they put a tarp out on the asphalt to make sure that you have this layer, which is keeping the beans from actually directly connecting with the asphalt. So this is in Brazil. It's a perforated stainless steel pad. I don't believe there's any active heating here. It's just a way of making sure that the airflow works. This is also in Brazil. So if I can, this is in Brazil. It's a room that was constructed. And what you see in the lower right-hand corner of the inset is the firebox. So actually, building a fire, you run the risk of the smoke from the fire coming in and tainting the flavor of the beans. But it's a perforated metal floor. And this is a variation on an outdoor drying pad, again, in Brazil. So when we think about technologies, right, these are mostly the technologies I think most of us think of. If I'm looking at this firebox, am I burning wood? Am I burning coconut husks? What other material am I burning? I might be burning propane. But what it is that GrainPro has done is a little bit different. So this is one of the things that you've developed, and so walk me through the parts of this, the individual components, and how they work together, and why it becomes an interesting option for some farmers.
Yes, you mentioned something very important, which is what are the options that we have on the market if they are friendly with the environment and if they have the proper conditions to have an optimal drying process. So that's why, based on those two components, we developed this solution, which is called the solar bubble dryer. And as you can see, it has two main components, the drying floor and a top cover, and it's a tunnel shape that is activated. There are one ventilator on one end and an exhaust port in the other end. And what you are having there, something that you mentioned, is the airflow, which is very, very important on this process, because you are having airflow that it is activated from one ventilator from one end, and practically you can dry the cocoa beans inside of the drying unit, even if it's you have clouds, even if it's raining. You can continually drying because you have that airflow that is coming from one end to other. From this version of the solar bubble dryer, we have with the solar panel, as you can see, thinking of farms where they don't have access to electricity. That solar panel is activating those ventilators, and that is creating the tunnel shape, as you can see on the picture. The other version is with electricity, where simply you can connect and you can activate the ventilators. And both versions are working very well in take the cocoa beans from one specific moisture content. It could be 45 or 40% of moisture content. It can drop to 7 to 6.5%, which is the recommended number that we are suggesting.
So if I can, let's talk about, a less than optimal environment. We don't have bright sun, right? Yeah. But let's say that we have enough sun to either power the fan. So we have an intake fan, which is blowing moisture, right? And because the output is slightly smaller, so there's a restriction. That's what's causing this to bubble up.
Yes. Yes.
So let's assume that as long as we have enough sun to drive the fan, or enough light to drive the fan, what we can do is this thing can work. So what is the capacity of this in terms of wet beans? So yes. Roughly, wet to dry, we might go from 100 kilos to 40 kilos, right? Yeah. But what is the capacity of something like this? And if it were full, about how long might it take to be able to completely dry beans under reasonable conditions?
Well, we have on the solar panel and in the electricity version, we have 2 dimensions, which is the 25 square meter and the 50 square meter. On the 25 square meter, you can dry 0.5 metric tons of wet cocoa beans. And for the larger one, you can dry 1 metric ton, right? Okay. That works well. We are recommending 5 centimeter of thickness when you are spreading the cocoa beans inside, and it comes with a rake. That rake is attached to the zippers because there is a zipper between the drying floor and the cover, right? You can attach the rake, and with an interval of 30 minutes, it is recommended to move constantly the beans so you can have a proper drying process. Going back to your point of that you are not having bright sun, this version of the solar panel comes with a battery, and that battery feed a charger controller, and that charger controller works for a specific hours in case that you don't have enough sun. So that's why it's very important, those wires and those elements on the structure of the solar bubble dryer. Right?
Yeah, so it makes sense that if I've got a solar panel, what I can do is I'm probably running 12 volts DC. I can get a 12 volt DC battery. I can get a charge controller. So I can essentially have this run continuously. And if there's enough sun, it will run from the panels. If there's not enough sun, it will run from the batteries. Yeah. Which means theoretically, this could run 24 hours a day?
Yes. Depending. The first condition is on the weather conditions. If you have enough sun, so it can start charging the controller. And the second is how you are going to take care of the battery, right? But in general, I can tell you that yes, you can continuously drying for 24 hours. And in that case, you will have excellent process. There are some conditions here. On the heavy rains where if you have a light rain, you can continually drying, but on heavy rains, there are some elements of flooding because remember that we have an exhaust port in the other end, so we just need to make sure that there will not be water inside of the drying unit. It will be too difficult because always there is air flowing from one end to other. So on the exhaust port, you will see all the wet air coming out, and that is how it works, this drying solution. Yeah.
So when I think that when most people think about conventional sun drying, right, under optimal conditions, so bright sun all the time, that we're really talking about taking somewhere between 5 and 7 days for complete drying, right?
Yeah.
So let's assume that I have good conditions. It's open sun on the panel, right? And so it's running. In this 25 square meter tunnel, about how long would I expect it to take for the beans to dry?
There is a difference based on some trials that we did in Guatemala, in Ecuador. There is a difference of 60% on the time on the drying process that is better on these conditions using the solar bubble dryer or other products that we have. And basically, you can go from 3 to 5 days to 2 to 3 days drying these cocoa beans here. It is important to mention that it is not always how fast are you drying, because always is important to have a slow drying process, but not too slow, because otherwise you can create bacteria. You could be on risk of the ochratoxins, which is something very important at the moment to produce cocoa beans. But here I can tell you that if we compare with a concrete patio, which we can say that is the most popular conventional method, versus the solar bubble dryer, you can dry with conditions of 30 Celsius and relative humidity of 60 to 65% of relative humidity. You can dry between 2 to 3 days in an optimal moisture content of 7%.
So you might be able to cut in just roughly 50%. Because one of the reasons why I'm asking that question is that, if I have a concrete pad, right, I can calculate return on investment. So it's going to cost me X number of dollars per square meter to build the pad, right? And I don't need to do much maintenance on the pad. Yep. But if I can cut the drying time in half for any given area, then how does that affect the ROI equation? Because I'm going to guess that, I don't know how expensive this is compared with, right, a very, very simple concrete drying patio.
Yes. Well, this unit, for instance, which is the 25 square meters, it has a cost of $1,300. So if you analyze, that is an initial investment, and there is no required maintenance investment like you have on a concrete patio. Fixing those cracks that you are having after some time, cleaning the patio, that process, it could be quite difficult. Plus the re-wetting process that is on risk, the cocoa beans on that side. When you have suddenly rains, that is a cost that you need to take in consideration, the labor and those elements that will affect not only the quality, but all the production chain and the issues that you are having. On this case, with a lifespan of 1 to 2 years, with the proper cares, when you are not using it, you are cleaning it, you are folding it, and you are storing it in a safe place. I can tell you that after the first harvest, after the first year, that $1,300 that has the cost of this unit, it is totally covered.
So you mentioned something that I think is also really important that I don't think many people think about. So one of the reasons why Ingemann likes the stainless steel, right, is that it absorbs heat and it stores heat and it radiates heat under the beans much more evenly than on a concrete pad. The stainless steel is also really easy to clean, right? If you have a concrete pad, and what you want to do is you want to get any contaminants from a previous drying batch off the concrete, it can be very, very difficult to clean the concrete. So is it really, so with the bubble dryer, is it really just a matter of unzipping it fully and then taking water and washing it down?
Yeah, exactly. That's the recommended steps to remove any residue, any bean that was left on there. Clean it with a washcloth, and make sure that you are store it in a safe place without any risk of puncture or tearing. And after that, you can use it for many times. We have some users around the world, in Ecuador, in Dominican Republic, in Mexico, that they have been using this solar bubble dryer. And as every item, it depends on the cares that you are having. But I can tell you that that is the lifespan, and that is the simple recommendations that we are suggesting to make sure that you are going to use an optimal process on this. Yeah.
Right. And I suppose also one of the things that makes sense in this particular case is that if you don't have a centralized post-harvest facility, so you're not bringing all the beans to one place for fermentation and drying, but what you want to do is you've got a farmer who's got a reasonable amount of cocoa at any particular time, right, who's doing the fermentation on the farm, right, that this represents a way for the farmer to sort of balance risk, because the farmer is taking all the risk in drying, right? If all of a sudden it starts to rain, they are completely hosed. I mean, I'm going to go back. That's the reason why this little triangular hut here was created. It's very, very simple to create. It's very simple to build. It's very inexpensive to build. I mean, it gets the cocoa off the ground, and if it starts to rain, it doesn't really matter. Right. And so any farmer can have one of these right next to their fermentation boxes. Right. But with the idea of the solar bubble dryer, you have the ability for to be able to share this among multiple farmers who might have staggered. So somebody might be harvesting one weekend, they can ferment and dry. Another farmer might be able to ferment and dry in a different schedule, and they can share this thing, which represents, an interesting cooperative venture outside traditional cooperative structures. But, people may remember that one of the photos that I showed was this tarp sitting on top of asphalt. And this is in Venezuela. I was there in outside of Rio Chico in Miranda State, Barlovento region in 2006. But one of the other products that you make is a collapsible dryer. And my guess is that this is for situations where two things. Number one is you want to make sure the cocoa is off the ground, right? And number two is, my guess is that you can pick this up and move it in a way so that very quickly, if it decides to start raining, it's not going to decide to start raining very quickly if it starts to rain, that what you can do is you can fold this up, right? And as long as you don't have a flooding problem, 4 or 5 centimeters of rain, you're not going to overtop the. Am I understanding what this is for?
Exactly. Yeah, perfectly. We have seen on many farms, as you show on that picture on Venezuela, that is the normal way to dry any type of commodity, and you have so many factors why you are not having high quality product over there. First, because it is directly in contact with the ground, as you said, with tires, with animals. With the same wet from one day to other, that is not allowing to have the proper drying process. But the second one is that logistic labor at the moment that you have some rain. What is the normal way in developing countries is that they are covering the beans with a tarpaulin, or they are putting the beans again in a jute bag or nylon bag, and they are storing it. They are waiting after the rain stops and then start the drying process again. That is extending the drying process. not only from the logistic perspective, but that is affecting the quality of the bean, the integrity of the same bean. So what we are doing here is we are providing three sizes of the collapsible dryer case: 25, 44, and 75 square meters. And that works on the way that the same farmer, they can spread all the beans inside, 5 centimeters of thickness, constantly mixing of the product inside. And if they have some rain, they just move one half of the drying size. They move it to the other size, and they cover it. It comes with a zipper. You can close the zipper. It can start the rain. You have sun again. You open it and you spread it again. So that is a very easy process for the farmers. They are finding that is more useful because they can move it and they can share. We have thinking when we are creating and we are developing products about how what is the behavior of the farmer and how they are organized. So we are thinking on cooperatives where they can use this product and they can move it around the villages. It is not needed to have a prepared ground. Just make sure that you are removing any rocks, any sticks that may puncture the drying surface. But aside from that, as you can see on the pictures, it doesn't need anything else, right? So for organizations and for projects where the farmers, they don't have access to bring the product to a post-harvesting processing center, that is very effective because they can do it in their own farm, in their own land, and we are helping the farmers in that way, right?
So we got a price for the 25 square meter solar bubble dryer, and you make a 25 square meter collapsible dryer. So what is the difference in price between the two?
Well, we are talking on the 25 square meter, and we are talking about the $300. Okay. So that is a big difference. As the same with the solar bubble dryer, it doesn't require any maintenance. It comes with a patching material in case there are some accidents. So that was very effective on the lifespan. We are talking almost similar time, 3 to 4 years using this product with the proper care, right? Cleaning up and that's all.
So you brought up a really, really interesting thing, which people may not think about. So one of the challenges that's associated with open sun drying, right, is animals running across the bed, right, and bird droppings. Right. Yeah. So, I was in Venezuela and there were chickens under the trees, the cacao trees in the back, and the drying pad was right there and chickens running back and forth across the drying pad. Yeah. And if you're thinking about salmonella or E. coli contamination, that's where it comes from. It comes from dogs and chickens and things like that, or bird droppings, which you have to be very, very careful about that. And that's different from ochratoxins, which are specifically organic. And are less influenced by animal intrusion. Obviously, if I have the bubble dryer, then there's no opportunity for any kind of animal contamination. Maybe some insects crawl through, right? Through the openings, maybe. But I'm not going to have a chicken walk in. I'm not going to have a dog walk in. I'm not. Yeah. But I'm looking at this. Does the fact that there's a barrier there, right, and it's not just a flat surface, does that inhibit animals from running across this?
Yes,
right? Or they go, no, it's fair game.
That inhibit that process of access of animals surrounding the drying surface, but also by spilling the beans outside from that, right? So it comes with an inflated tube, which is very easy. Those collapsible dryer case comes with a pump. So with a feed pump, you can inflate those walls. And that works in that direction, so you can have organized your beans on the same place without any problem. The issues with the chickens, the issue with the animals, the diseases that you mentioned, they are very important. But I also want to mention about the free fatty acids, which is very important on this stage, right? We are talking that when the processors measures the free fatty acids. in their countries. They are detecting that they are above 1.75%, which is the number allowed by the FAO and the Codex Alimentarius. And that's because you are not having the proper drying process, right? With the creation of the free fatty acids, the ochratoxins, as you mentioned, and all the contaminants that can cause that the processor can reject the sample of the cocoa beans, and they are going to lose money by receiving those beans that they are contaminated, right? So it is a very important factor that it is affecting everyone, not only the producer, but also the processor that is dealing with these issues, right?
Right. So at a very simple level, if I can, when I think about free fatty acid content, I think about sort of susceptibility to going rancid. So the higher the free fatty acid content, the sooner, right, or the more susceptibles, in this particular case, the cocoa beans, the fat in the cocoa beans is going to go rancid, right?
Yeah.
And so understanding how drying will affect free fatty acid content, right, could, depending upon who the buyer is. I mean, I can tell you that I don't know of any craft chocolate maker, right, who is in fact got a lab set up to measure free fatty acid content of the beans they're buying when they hit their processor. But if I am selling into a cooperative that's selling to an industrial chocolate maker eventually, that they are going to be very, very careful because it will affect shelf life and other issues of the finished product that's going on.
But let me mention something very important. There are new discovered elements from the processors and even in other industries like coffee that they are discovering new measurements or new elements that at the end is affecting the quality. One of them is the water activity, which basically is how the water inside of the bean is reacting and is available to produce bacteria. It is the same case on the cocoa beans, right? So maybe we are not having the tools, but we are going in that direction. The same producers and the processors, they have more knowledge about why the beans are getting those defects, right? Like off flavors in some specific aromas or some elements that is affecting the quality. So I think that we are going in that direction where the people is understanding better why the quality is not in a good condition, right? And that's why we are mentioning those new words and new trends that are happening in different industries.
I have a real geek question, just because it occurs to me. In the solar bubble dryer, so let's go back a page because we have the technology, we can do that. So in the solar bubble dryer, would it make sense to actually have a hygrometer on the output end so that what we can do is we can actually measure, and especially if that hygrometer was a recording hygrometer, we could say we started off here and we know how quickly the humidity drops and when we reach to a certain percentage.
Yeah.
Does that make, does that make sense? I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm going, I would really like to instrument this and understand how, and then what I do is I'd actually have another hygrometer on the outside and I'd tie that to temperature and I'd sort of understand time, temperature and humidity inside and outside and how that affects the performance of the dryer. I'm just sort of intrigued.
On paper, it makes totally sense.
Okay.
But on practice, I think that is not the reality. You have extensive experience visiting farms in Africa, in Ecuador, in Dominican Republic, that they are the leaders in production. That is not happening, even if it's a big farm. And I have been in big farms in Ecuador, where I see that it's very rustic or very conventional in the way that they are measuring those elements, right? Even the moisture content. It's funny because they still measuring by biting the bean or cracking up. And that is working for them because it's a cultural thing. But on practice, it's a little bit difficult that they can have access to those measure units or equipment, but I can tell you that for academic purposes or understanding the behavior of these products, it makes totally sense to have those products there.
I'm saying it would be interesting to do it, right? And what you've done is you said there is absolute value in doing it, but nobody does it, right?
Yes,
it's like, there are some people who have a very scientific approach to fermentation, right? And what they will do is they will have a probe thermometer sitting in the middle of their thing, and so they can go in and but the real people will have a digital thermometer which records. Every 5 minutes they're taking a temperature reading, and what they can do is they can go look and then map that against maybe changes in pH of the cotyledon.
Sure.
And what we can do is we can say, one of the things that I learned that was really important is when it comes to efficient drying, is that the difference between daytime and nighttime temperature is very, very important. And if one of the things you can do is you can keep it from getting, well, for fermentation especially, but in drying, if you keep the temperature from going below a certain temperature, you can keep the drying going, right? And what you also want to look at is like perhaps peristaltic action when it comes to drying. I mean, I don't think that the farmers in Chihuahua knew that this is what they were doing, right? But the idea is they would take their cocoa and they'd put it out in the bright sun early in the morning, and then rebag it or move it into shade, right, when the sun was directly overhead and it was getting too hot. Right. And then putting it back out in the afternoons. So what was happening, number one, is when the cocoa gets too hot, it gets a slight crust on it. And that keeps it from drying effectively. Right. So it's like you notice that if you do toast, right, the inside has got a lot of moisture in it. That's because the crust on the outside is keeping the moisture from evaporating. Right? So you got that issue.
There are some percentage of acetic acid that evaporates on that process. If you evaporate too fast or completely, you are going to lose some quality sensorial elements on the cocoa beans. That's why it's important that you are mentioning that it is not the proper way. When you are drying in tarpaulins or in nylon, you are in the risk of overheating, and that overheating will affect. And you show that picture that you can burn the beans. And then you will not have what you are looking for, right? That will affect your wallet. That will affect all the operations at the end when you are trying to trade those beans. Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's understanding that acetic acid is going to evaporate out in the water phase much more efficiently. So if they're wet, the acetic acid will evaporate out more quickly and at a lower temperature. Which is the primary point. But the notion of peristaltic action is if you can get the outside, this is what they discovered after the fact in Chihuahua, is that if they heated the beans up and then moved them into cool place, the outer layer of the bean, which was drier and warmer, would suck the moisture from the inside of the bean, right? So that when they put it out again in the afternoon, it will actually dry more efficiently. And so when we think about the geographic indicator, the protected designation of origin, the denominación de origen, which is associated with Chihuahua, some of it is very, very specific to this particular method of drying, which contributes to the particular mystique around the Chihuahua origin. This has been fascinating for me that, the technology which is associated with drying, when a lot of people think about technology, they think about mechanical drying. So how do we build some sort of drum dryer, some sort of forest heat, some sort of thing that we can do this? If I'm a really, really big cooperative or a really big estate holder, and I can afford to invest tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in dryers, and I've seen places where there are multiple gas dryers, right? And the infrastructure is just enormous and the investment is huge, right? But that kind of technology and that kind of approach doesn't scale down very, very easily, right? And if what it is that we want to do is we want to be able to provide some smaller scale cooperative capabilities, right? So one of the challenges that's faced right now is if I'm a buyer of cocoa, I really don't want to go and say, I'm going to buy half a ton from you and half a ton from you and half a ton from you. what I really like to do is get together a small group of people and say, I can buy a container, I can buy 12 tons from you, right?
Sure.
And you guys figure out how to do this. But that might not be a conventional farmer-based organization, a conventional cooperative with hundreds of members and thousands of members and support from NGOs and all this other kind of stuff. Yeah. But being able to provide different methods of federation, I think, is a really, really interesting opportunity to share the technology and to share the cost of the technology is, I think, a really, really interesting and valuable approach.
And have sustainable practices as well, I think, because as you mentioned, those that it's called guardiolas in Latin America, those big drums where they are drying the beans, they are not friendly with the environment. And at the end, what you are looking as buyer, as processor, is to have sustainable practices, right? To commit with the environment, to commit with the mission that everyone should has in protecting the world, in protecting the environment, and also protecting those farmers in trying to honor the efforts that they are making by having practices that they are not going to be on risk of smell, that smoke that is coming from those dryers, of using wood, of using other elements to burn and to activate those dryers. So that is not a responsible way to do the agriculture and to do the agribusiness, right? So that's
so when we think about, what I think of as life cycle costs, so we need to look at total cost of ownership, and it becomes a really, really important thing to think not just about how much money are we spending to purchase this particular bit of technology, but what are all of the other costs that are associated with supporting the technology, right? Which I don't think many people really take into consideration. I have a colleague who's building a conventional drying facility, and they're burning something in order to be able to provide the heat associated with that. I'm going, no, that's not the way we want to do. Diego, this is all fascinating to me. It's been really, really interesting. If you're out there watching, you're participating live, you've got a question for Diego, now is the time, because we're in the last 15 minutes or so, what we're saying today. And even if you just want to do a shout out and say, hey, I'm connecting from Peru, or I'm connecting from someplace else, please let me know. Just love to know where people are connecting in. But what I want to do, if we can, is that, again, I think that the notion is that we need to make sure that the commodity, the soft commodity that we're working with, is dried properly for storage and transportation. Number one is we want to reduce the possibility of mold and mildew. Number two is that we have an issue of insect infestation. There are a bunch of things associated with that. And so I think this is where, most people are familiar with GrainPro as a brand, right? Yeah. And so let's show a truly scary picture. So what is it that we're looking at here, right? So we're going to spend the last couple of minutes talking about storage and transportation, assuming that we figured out how to dry things properly.
Yeah. This was a picture that I took in Ecuador. It was very surprised because this group of farmers, they were dealing with infestation on a very tropical weather with high temperatures, high relative humidity, and they have been storing the cocoa beans in conventional jute bags. But they realized that the infestation was very high. They opt to choose to put a nylon inside of the stack of bags and fumigate with some chemicals. But then they realized that those chemicals, they were not effective because those insects, they are getting used to those chemicals. And at the end, they were wasting the money. They were wasting the opportunities to trade for high quality cocoa beans. And they discovered by using the concept of modified atmosphere, which is the concept of GrainPro on providing this solution, where basically we are isolating the commodity from the external environment by having a special material with a gas barrier where you don't have access of oxygen, you don't have access of moisture. They were able to create the ideal environment inside and then have that the insects died from asphyxia. Those insects from eggs, larvae, pupae in adults, they died in a matter of days or even in a matter of hours, because at most population of insects inside of an hermetic unit like this, they will die faster. And you can think about a conventional example that I can give it to you. If you and me are in a sealed room, we seal the windows, seal the doors, we are going to breathe the oxygen and we are going to produce CO2. And at some specific time, both of us will die. This is exactly what we are doing by providing this technology, that they are dying with the same production of CO2. On the graphic, if you analyze the 21% of oxygen where we have on the normal environment, it drops below 5%, which is very toxic. And the opposite way, the CO2 from 0.03%, which is very small amount of CO2 in the air, it goes up above 15 to 20%, even 30%. And that element is very toxic. The CO2 is not only produced from the same respiration of the insect, it is produced from the same commodity as well. Every grain, every agricultural commodity, they have the respiration rate. In the case of cocoa beans, the respiration rate is very high. So that means that they are naturally producing the CO2, right? So that is what we are doing in trying to control the infestation and to control the mold development as well. The molds survive because the oxygen. So what we are creating here is a oxygen depleted environment. And that's the success of this.
So is the mold respiring as well? So it's
Yes.
the mold. So if I can, for people who may have jumped into this conversation sort of partway through, is that the plastic is an oxygen barrier and a moisture barrier, and it is impermeable in both directions.
Yeah.
All right. So
Yes.
the idea being is that if I can put something in this bag, and then I can close the bag tightly. So are these done using zipper folds, or how are they closed?
Yeah, it has a zipper. We have from very small storage units, like single bags that goes from 5 kilo, 15 kilo, up to 69 kilo bag, where you can close it with zipper or cable ties, where you only can twist it and put a cable tie. That's for individual packaging. For this picture, it's a product called Cocoon Indoor, which is polyethylene with a lot of layers and with the gas barrier, and that it's closed with the zipper at the top, right? So you are putting the stack inside. When you reach the height, you close the zipper, and that start to do the effect of control.
Again, for people who may not be aware, there are bags into which we can put things, and then individually. So for example, maybe I've got the standard bag size in Ecuador is 65 kilograms. So I put 65 kilograms in a bag and close it, right? But what I might be in a position, especially if I'm in an intermediary. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing in bags from a number of other places. I might put them on pallets, right? But what then I would do is I could cover the entire pallet with one of these things, right? And so I don't need individual bags. And because what you'd want to do is you'd want to put one of these bags inside a jute or polypropylene bag for protection, because you don't want to cut this bag, the plastic bag, right? So putting it inside a jute or putting it inside a polypropylene is going to keep it the integrity of the oxygen barrier and the vapor barrier inside. So that's one of the reasons why it's important that it be dried properly. Right? Because if we have moisture above a certain component, we run the risk of it sweating inside the bag. No good. Right? But even if that's the case, we've got a slightly high moisture content, that if we can get the carbon dioxide content up enough and the oxygen content low enough, nothing's going to grow inside. So we have other issues associated with humidity, right? But they're not associated with perhaps mold or insects, right? Which is we need to worry about. And then this whole notion of cocoons, right? So larger things, like individual pallets, right? I can have much larger outdoor storage or indoor storage, which are multiple pallets. But I think also importantly and interestingly for people, is that people may not know that there is a whole industry in stuffing pallets into containers right at the port. So there are people whose jobs it is to do nothing but inspect the beans and write reports, right, about the quality of the beans. So they're doing cut tests and other measurements, right, and before they put them into the container. And then there's this whole industry of wrapping the interior of the container, like putting all these materials inside the container and putting moisture absorbers and all that kind of stuff inside the container to reduce the likelihood of the beans being damaged from moisture in shipment. And so if I can, what we've got here, if I don't know if people can see my cursor moving around, is this looks like one of the cocoons, which is wrapped around bags of beans, which do not appear to be on pallets. Right. Yet what they're doing is they're inside the container. And so they're providing moisture barrier and other barrier. So the beans are protected as they're transported on the ocean from one part of the world to another part of the world. Am I getting that correct?
Yes, Clay. This product, it's called TransSafe Liner. And what you are having here is protection from port to port at the moment that you are exporting, or at the moment, even if it's internal transportation within the country, that is a very important solution, because what you are having when you are shipping, let's put an example that you are shipping cocoa beans from Honduras to the US. The difference between the ports in a tropical country like Honduras to the US, let's say that it was in January or February, there is a difference on the port, right? Where temperatures almost 40 Celsius in a tropical country, and it could go in 10 Celsius or below. And that temperature fluctuation during the journey, what is causing is condensation, right? Warm air is getting water, and that's why you see that the top layer of the bags on a container that is not well protected, they are getting wet. And because the wet, you are seeing many mold development that is going to affect the whole load, right? We are isolating the bags here during the journey, during the transportation. That's why the TransSafe Liner is very effective. There is one side of 20-foot container and the other is for 40-foot container, and both works on the same direction, that you can store individual bags, you can store big bags or tote bags, or you can store it by pallets as well. So at the end, you are closing it with the zipper. There are some regulations that you need to comply in each country, which is the fumigation. And this is very friendly with fumigation with CO2 or nitrogen, which is a natural gases. So if you are dealing with organic cocoa beans, this is very important, because you can put a hose, fumigate the whole load, closing it, and that will be protected all the way, right? What is the difference between this and the other picture that you show is that one was just for storage, this is just for transportation, but we have the GrainPro bags, which are the most popular, which are the individual bags that they can go from the moment that you are closing the bag with the GrainPro bags until you are going to process those cocoa beans, right? So there is some difference between the solutions, but this has been very effective on markets like Ivory Coast, Ghana, when sometimes the price of the cocoa beans is very low, the margins are very low. You can opt to protect the whole load with prices of $250 or $400, depending on the size of the TransSafe Liner, right?
So I have a really quick question. So many beans are shipped what's called CIF, so cost insurance freight. So if I have my cocoa protected in this kind of way, does that affect insurance costs? Because I have to have a premium on I pay a premium based on quantity of cocoa. So if I'm protecting the cocoa that way, have you seen it affect shipping costs, especially associated with insurance?
Yes. The shipping companies, the global shipping companies, they are interested, because it's their responsibility. At the end, they need to respond on any problems that they may have, not only because the quality, but also we are seeing a lot of global supply chain disruptions where you have delays, where you have containers that they are arriving to other port and they are on risk to have 1 month or 2 month lost in any other port. And then the shipping companies, they are interested to adapt to this situation, and that is affecting on the policy that they are offering to their customers and the rest of the business that they are making. So absolutely, it makes totally sense that they can use these solutions.
Right. And I know from experience, because I was hired to do some due diligence on 4,000 tons of cocoa that was spoiled at the port of Amsterdam. Unfortunately, it's a lot of cocoa to get spoiled. That again, for anybody who's interested in buying direct and sourcing direct and like trying to cut as many middlemen out of the equation as possible, there's a lot of stuff that you have to know, right, in order to do this. And so understanding the difference between FOB and CIF, for example, right? In an FOB transaction, I, as the buyer, would need to provide the certificate of insurance to the shipper before the container is loaded onto the boat. Whereas with a CIF contract, the insurance would be included in all of that, and you as the buyer don't need to have the insurance. Just one minor difference. You need to know, for example, if it's coming out of West Africa, then chances are that the governing body of law is the Federation of Cocoa Commerce, right? And that everybody that is involved in the FCC comes out of London. So there's an interesting monopoly that's going on there in terms of, no matter what the destination port is, if it comes out of West Africa, it's an FCC, and you need to know what the rules of engagement are, because there are some very specific requirements. You need to do X and Y and Z when it arrives at the port. You need to get it off the port, in a certain amount of time. Otherwise, all bets are off, and it's very, very interesting. So this part of the conversation, right, is really aimed at people who want to trade directly. If you want to not have an intermediary, you don't want to have a Darnhauer, or you don't want to have an Uncommon who's going to take possession of your cocoa at the port and then is going to contract with maybe Ecom Atlantic Cocoa to do the transportation, right? If you want to do all of that stuff yourself, these are things that you need to be aware of, because you, as the buyer in a directly traded environment, don't have a lot of options to mitigate risk, right? You're taking on 100% of the risk. And so if you don't understand this stuff, you're going to have cocoa that's going to show up at your factory and it's going to be ruined, right? And you don't have any option, right? For,
and the stakeholders are well aware about these solutions. And it's funny because there are different practices in the world, and depending on the geographic location. And I can tell you that countries like Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, they are very strong in the narcotic inspections. And they already know that if one container is coming with a transit liner or with the bags, they need to be careful to open the zipper, make the inspections, to open the bag, take a sample. So it's very clear, and they know what are the benefits of this, because at the end, for countries very important for the cocoa industry like Ecuador, they know that if they are exporting high quality, if they are exporting good volume, the country name will be more important in the industry, right? So they are interested to protect this type of solutions and try to use these solutions for the benefit for the name of the country, even governments or agriculture industry.
Right. I hadn't really thought about the importance of training the people who are doing inspection at the port of export and the port of import. So not only would you need to have this done in the port of Guayaquil, and you need to know what's going on, but if it's showing up at the port of San Diego or the port of San Francisco or the port of Houston, if somebody's going to open up that and inspect that, and what they're going to do is they're just going to take a knife, and because normally what they're doing is they're used to taking a little sharp poker and just poking it through the bag and pulling out the sample. You can't do that because you've just ruined the integrity of the bag. So really, 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 really fascinating. Diego, we're just a couple of minutes after the hour. I want to thank you. I know that you have a hard stop. Before we do that, I want to say hello to Mark and Yuri at Blue Spruce in Colorado, who said thanks for the information on GrainPro and the drying processes. They're saying hello from Denver. I just wanted to get that comment in today. Thanks for joining us. Is there a last minute comment that you'd like to make before I get the last word?
No, I just want to thank you, Clay, about this opportunity. I think that is very important to use these platforms to share the technology that we are offering, but not only on the commercial wave, also on the social mission, because GrainPro is very strong on the social mission. We are very careful in trying to understand how we can help the world to become a better place to live. That's why we are helping the farmers so they can increase their incomes. We are helping the agriculture industry so they can use better practices. So I just want to invite all of the attendees to visit our website so they can learn more about the sustainability projects that we are having. We have collection program in the US where the people can send the bags, the people can send the transafe liner to a collection point, and then we are making the efforts to recycle or to find out any other use for this plastic. But at the same time, we are measuring the impact that we are having on the small farmers. So at the moment that we are complying with all the social elements that we are trying to do and try to help those farmers to have a better lives, right? So thank you very much, Clay. I think that this was very amazing.
It's been fascinating learning experience for me. I mean, I have my background and my understanding, and one of the reasons why I love having these interviews on The Chocolate Life is there are little bits of things, to fill in the missing pieces and the missing dots and go, I really hadn't thought about this particular problem that way. So hopefully the people out there have learned as much from this as I have. I certainly have learned a lot. What I do want to remind people as we do close off today is that for every single one of these live streams on The Chocolate Life, there is a post on The Chocolate Life that you can go to, and that it has resources that you can refer to before and during and after the live stream. And so here is the post right now. It's on The Chocolate Life. This is The Chocolate Life as you see it right now. What you'll do is you'll find a link to the page on the GrainPro website for the bubble dryer. You'll also find a PDF you can download to talk about that. There is a link to the page about the collapsible dryer case, as well as the PDF of the spec sheet for it. There is a link to a blog post about preserving quality cocoa, and then a link to a PDF for the GrainPro bag. So all of these resources are available right now for you to go and for you to work with. There's also the entire gallery of photographs that I put here to get today. So these three are a gallery from Diego. He sent them to me this morning. I was really happy to get them up. But these other galleries, all of these images, with the exception of the solar dryer tunnel, which I got from a WhatsApp presentation that I was involved in, all of these images are ones that I have taken from my travels around the world. And I've got examples of other kinds of drying approaches in Bolivia and a couple of other places. And so as I find them and am reminded, I will put them up here. I would also like to remind people that I appreciate your support. If you're not a member, you can click on join. There's always a free. Since 2008, when I started, there's been a free tier. If you'd like to support what it is that I'm doing monetarily, then thank you very much. I appreciate that. I know that in this time, there are lots of places dollars can be spent, and I appreciate any dollars that are sent my way to be able to support what it is that I'm doing. And with that, Diego, what it is I'd like to do is I'd like to end the broadcast, as I end every single one of these broadcasts, with a real simple request that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.